Your grandmother probably used fertilizers and pesticides in her garden that would get you arrested today, or at least heavily fined. She didn't know any better. Nobody did. These were the miracle products that every hardware store sold, that every agricultural extension office recommended, and that every neighbor swore by. They worked beautifully. Your tomatoes grew bigger, your apples stayed worm-free, and your lawn was the envy of the neighborhood. But what was so dangerous about these wonder products that governments around the world eventually banned them? The answer involves explosions, dying eagles, poisoned soil, and consequences we're still paying for decades later. Let's start with something that might surprise you: ammonium nitrate. This was the fertilizer of choice for serious gardeners after World War II. Large-scale production began in the 1940s when it was manufactured for wartime munitions. But once the war ended, all that production capacity needed somewhere to go. Suddenly, this powerful nitrogen source became available at every garden store in America. Grandma could buy it by the bag, no questions asked, and it made everything grow like crazy. The problem? It is also a component of explosive mixtures used in mining, quarrying, and civil construction. And unfortunately, it can be weaponized with devastating effect. The potential for misuse prompted regulatory measures worldwide. Australia implemented dangerous goods regulations in 2005 requiring licensing. Afghanistan banned it outright because it was being used in bombs against NATO soldiers. Similar restrictions exist in China, Colombia, Germany, Ireland, and the Philippines. Today, if you want to buy ammonium nitrate in most places, you need special storage facilities, documented oversight, and you create massive liability for yourself. Most dealers simply stopped selling it because the new regulations meant accounting for every pound and storing it like you were running a military depot. But the ammonium nitrate story is relatively simple compared to what comes next. Let me tell you about DDT, the miracle bug killer that changed everything and then nearly destroyed America's most iconic bird. Developed as the first modern synthetic insecticide in the 1940s, DDT was initially used with extraordinary success to combat malaria, typhus, and other insect-borne diseases among military and civilian populations. It was a genuine wonder chemical. By October 1945, DDT was available for public sale in the United States as both an agricultural pesticide and a household insecticide. At just 25 cents per pound, it was cheap and devastatingly effective. Grandma probably sprayed it in her garden, around her house, maybe even directly on her children to keep the mosquitoes away. Everyone did. It seemed completely harmless to humans while being absolutely lethal to insects. Then scientists started noticing something strange happening to birds of prey. Bald eagles, peregrine falcons, brown pelicans, their populations were crashing. The first link between DDT and these declining populations came from a consistent observation. These birds had extraordinarily high body burdens of DDT metabolites in their tissues. But what was it actually doing to them? The answer was heartbreaking in its simplicity, eggshell-thinning. DDT interfered with calcium metabolism in adult birds, causing them to lay eggs with shells so thin they would crack under the weight of the incubating parent. Mass die-offs started with the widespread use of pesticides after the war, and bird population declines were greatest in areas where pesticides were most heavily used. In 1972, the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, finally issued a cancellation order for DDT based on its adverse environmental effects on wildlife and potential human health risks. Today, DDT is classified as a probable human carcinogen. The good news? In the years following the ban, bald eagle and other bird of prey populations slowly recovered. It was a clear demonstration that removing the chemical allowed ecosystems to heal, but it took decades, and we came frighteningly close to losing the bald eagle forever. Now let me take you back even further, to a pesticide so toxic it makes DDT look gentle by comparison. Lead arsenate was the original apple spray, and if you have ever eaten an apple from an orchard that was active before the 1950s, the soil beneath those trees might still be poisoned. Lead arsenate was widely used across Australia, Canada, New Zealand, the United States, England, France, North Africa, and many other regions. It was principally used against the codling moth on apples, but also on other fruit trees, garden crops, turf grasses, and even against mosquitoes. In the early 1900s, the U.S. Department of Agriculture determined that spraying lead arsenate on fruit trees was highly effective against those destructive caterpillars. The agency promoted it enthusiastically, and orchardists across the country were thrilled to finally have a way to control the pest. The horror of lead arsenate is that it was designed to be persistent. That persistence was considered a feature, not a bug. The longer it stayed on the plants, the longer it kept killing insects. Alternatives were found to be less effective or more toxic to plants and animals until DDT came along in 1947 and eventually replaced it. The EPA did not ban lead arsenate on food crops until 1988. But here is the truly disturbing part. Although these toxic legacy pesticides have not been used for almost 70 years, lead and arsenic soil concentrations remain above Washington state cleanup levels on former orchard land. Lead arsenate was used on cherry and pear orchards, golf courses, and home gardens. The heavy metals persist across central Washington and countless other regions. Lead and arsenic bind with soil and remain for decades. These toxic byproducts are left from days before DDT and organophosphates, when arsenical pesticides were the treatment of choice. If your house was built on land that was once an orchard, your children might be playing in contaminated soil right now. Let's talk about something that might still be in your garage. Phosphorus fertilizer. This one seems so innocent. Phosphorus is a naturally occurring mineral nutrient necessary for plant growth. Your lawn needs it. Your vegetables need it. What could possibly be wrong with giving plants what they naturally require? The problem is not the phosphorus itself. It is what happens when it runs off into waterways. High phosphorus levels in water bodies lead to excessive algae and aquatic plant growth that harms aquatic life and impairs recreational use. It causes toxic algae blooms, reduces water clarity, and depletes oxygen levels so severely that fish suffocate. The runoff from lawns and gardens accumulated over decades, devastating freshwater ecosystems across the country. Today, at least 11 states ban the use or sale of phosphorus fertilizer. Illinois, Maine, Maryland, Michigan, Minnesota, New Jersey, New York, Vermont, Virginia, Washington, and Wisconsin. Minnesota was the first to pass laws restricting chemical fertilizers in 2004, and phosphorus was banned altogether because it was devastating their famous lakes. Many Florida counties implemented seasonal fertilizer bans prohibiting application of fertilizers containing nitrogen or phosphorus during the rainy summer months when runoff is worst. This is the fertilizer Grandma used liberally, and we are still cleaning up the mess. Perhaps the most insidious story involves something that was marketed as the ultimate in sustainable organic gardening: biosolids, also known as sewage sludge. In the 1920s, the farming community began using sewage sludge from local wastewater treatment plants. It seemed like a perfect solution: take human waste, process it, and return those nutrients to the soil. The circle of life. Except biosolids are not the same as compost. They are byproducts from wastewater treatment facilities that include nutrient-dense organic matter, but also contain toxic PFAS, forever chemicals, heavy metals such as arsenic, lead, and mercury, industrial chemicals, microplastics, and prescription drugs. Nearly 70 million acres of United States farmland could be contaminated by PFAS, according to Biosolids Industry Group estimates. This contamination stems from widespread use of sewage sludge as fertilizer. Methods like irradiation, sewage sludge, and genetic engineering are all expressly prohibited when growing or processing organic foods, but for decades, this material was spread on fields across America. There is one more historical fertilizer worth mentioning: Chilean saltpeter, also known as sodium nitrate. It was so valuable it was called white gold, and Chile actually went to war with its neighbors over areas containing deposits of this material in the War of the Pacific. For centuries, it was the primary source of nitrogen for agriculture worldwide. But Chilean saltpeter deposits are a natural source of perchlorate, a chemical that, at sufficiently high concentrations, interferes with iodide uptake in the thyroid gland. In the United States, sodium nitrate is now prohibited from organic crop production unless use is restricted to no more than 20% of the crop's total nitrogen requirement. The synthetic fertilizer revolution eventually displaced it, but not before creating significant environmental contamination in areas where it was heavily used. Do you see the pattern emerging? Every generation has had its miracle garden product that turned out to be dangerous. The cycle is always the same: a wonder product that works too well, used too much, until we discover the hidden costs. From lead arsenate to DDT to phosphorus fertilizers, we keep making the same mistakes. And that brings us to the uncomfortable question we need to ask ourselves: what products are we using today that our grandchildren will be shocked we ever touched? The fertilizers and pesticides on store shelves today may follow the same trajectory. History suggests we will not know the full consequences for decades. The chemicals that built modern agriculture came with hidden costs we are still discovering. Lead arsenate contamination persists in soils 70 years after the last application. DDT metabolites still appear in wildlife decades after the ban. PFAS from biosolids may have contaminated 70 million acres of farmland. Understanding this history does not mean we should abandon modern agriculture or live in fear of every product on the shelf. But it does mean we should approach miracle solutions with healthy skepticism. The science eventually catches up, but often decades too late for the eagles, the lakes, the soil, and sometimes the people who trusted that what was being sold to them was safe. Consider what researchers have documented about these chemicals. Scientific studies published in peer-reviewed journals have traced the devastating effects of DDT on bird populations with meticulous precision. Researchers observed that eggshell-thinning began with the mass use of pesticides after the war, and the correlation between pesticide application rates and bird population declines was unmistakable. When the ban finally came, scientists watched in real time as populations began their slow recovery, proof that these ecosystems could heal if we simply stopped poisoning them. The story of lead arsenate contamination is equally well documented. Studies of former orchard land in Washington state have shown that even after nearly 7 decades without application, heavy metal concentrations remain stubbornly above safe levels. These were not temporary treatments, they were permanent alterations to the chemistry of the soil itself. Children playing in backyards that were once orchards may be exposed to lead and arsenic levels that exceed modern safety standards, all because of decisions made generations before they were born. And the phosphorus crisis in our lakes? Scientists have tracked the eutrophication of freshwater ecosystems with growing alarm, documenting how decades of fertilizer runoff have created dead zones, toxic algal blooms, and devastated fish populations. The policies that states have implemented are not precautionary measures. They are emergency responses to ecological collapse that was already well underway. Grandma did not know. The agricultural extension agents did not know. The scientists who developed these products often did not know. Or perhaps they knew, but believed the benefits outweighed risks that seemed theoretical at the time. But now we do know the pattern, and that knowledge comes with responsibility. We have seen the cycle repeat enough times to recognize it. The initial enthusiasm, the widespread adoption, the gradual accumulation of troubling evidence, and finally the reckoning when the damage becomes impossible to ignore. The next time someone promises you a miracle product for your garden, remember the fertilizers Grandma used. Remember the bald eagles that nearly vanished from American skies. Remember the lakes choked with algae and the orchards that poisoned their own soil. Remember that what seems perfectly safe today might be banned tomorrow. And remember why they made those miracle products illegal.